All right, class. Well, it's been another week in our class. Now we're on to June 6th through 11th, selecting a sample and measuring instruments. Hopefully you finished last week's activities by June 4th and submitted those on time on selecting and defining a research topic. So that would include finishing the reading of chapters 3 and 4 and taking the quizzes on those, as well as the discussion board. And then also going through and reading some research reports on your topic, 4 or 5 per week. So hopefully you've read around 4 or 5 of these research reports. And then also finishing and submitting the city certification. I'll be grading that soon. And then the learning modules as well, going through those. So this week, starting June 6th here, we have some examples of literature reviews. So next week, I believe, is when your preliminary literature review will be completed and will be needed to be handed in by the end of next week. But this week, you should be continuing to read your 4 to 5 articles a week, and that's 2 to 3 from previous. I'm going to change that right now, in fact. So it says 4 to 5. Anyway, you should be continuing to read those articles, but what I want you to do now is take a look at some of these literature review items to look for. There's a literature review section in our class, and you can go to some of those papers and look at how they read and read through a few of those. And here are some things to look for in a literature review. Is it comprehensive? And does that mean it does it include every article that has to do with the topic being studied? Or is it missing some key articles that are really part of the work? Is it organized so that references that are least related to the problem are discussed first and the most related references are discussed last? Is the review more than a series of abstracts or annotations? Does the review compare and contrast results of the various studies listed? Does the review include mostly primary sources of information? Again, we go back to that whole idea of you should be reading mostly research study reviews, not just secondary sources of information that are a compilation of other works. And also you can tell that if it's a primary source of information, if it has a methods and results section. Those are some of the key ways that you can tell. And then let's see, only references that are relevant to the problem, includes an original summary and interpretation of the literature. So again, you are going to interpret the literature a little bit in your literature review that you write. And then the review references are cited completely and accurately. These are some things to look for in the literature review. But for this week, you're just kind of doing a preliminary look at some of the literature review examples. I'll show you where to find those. You can go to General Class Items right here, and then go to Sample Papers. And you can find some sample papers. There's a university example, teaching and learning research article, nature of coupling, meta-analysis, death and dying. So you can take a look at those and you find the literature review section or review of literature and just read through those to get an idea of what the heck is a literature review. Basically what it is just, it's the fact that somebody went through, read a whole bunch of articles on a topic, and now they're explaining what those articles say. In a literature review, it's a formal thing. You do not write, I found these articles, or me, or something. You don't refer to yourself in a literature review. Instead, you say something like, Smith and Jones completed a study of clinical mental health patients in an outpatient clinic, and their findings were very interesting. Here's what they found. But you don't say, I searched through these types of articles, and I was interested in this topic. No, it's not about you. It's about what the literature says, and you're trying to give the audience, whoever you write to, a good idea of what the literature is saying about whatever topic it is that you've chosen to cover. So that's what a literature review is all about. You'll learn more about what one's about just by looking through those articles. This week you'll also be reading the next 2 chapters in the textbook, so chapters 5 and 6, and taking a look at those slides that are there to nicely summarize those chapters. You'll go through a few more learning modules about evaluating information, and also modules about using information. And then you're going to do a discussion board activity about reviewing the literature. And so this one is going to ask some of the places where you're finding good research reviews. on your research. Share some databases that you found helpful. And maybe there are some professional organizations too that contribute to research in your area of interest. And then finally, you'll complete those 2 quizzes on the 2 chapters that you've read, chapters 5 and 6. But do look ahead just a little bit, because you'll need to know about the preliminary literature review, which will be due next week. If you are reading those 4 to 5 articles per week, you'll do just fine on this literature review, especially if you're writing down what you read with an annotated reference list that you've been creating. And if you have good information about each article, this article was a survey study, this article found these, here were the participants, this article found these findings about those participants after implementing this kind of implementation. If you write those down like I've asked you to do, then you'll do just fine with this literature review, as long as you continue on doing it. So just keep doing that. Keep reading those research reports like I talked to you about doing last week, and you'll do okay. And that's all the activities for this week. But I thought it'd be a good idea also just to show you an example literature review and go through one with you just very briefly here. So, and this will kind of help you to get started on an idea of what a literature review is. So this is an article that I've recently submitted to be published. Barriers to technology use in large and small school districts. Now, any research study that you do has to have some kind of a review of the literature. This shows that you've actually looked into what's out there and that you're not reinventing the wheel like somebody else has already done, or doing things as somebody else has already done. And also that you have some basic knowledge, at least a basic knowledge of what's going on in the field. So most articles that you read that are research studies will have a literature review here. This one has an introduction, and then right here it says literature review, which reminds me I probably should have capitalized that R. Anyway, possible barriers to effective technology integration come in several different categories, including access to technology tools and resources, technology training and support, administrative support, time to plan and prepare for technology integration, and beliefs about the importance and usefulness of technology tools and resources. Now those words are mine, but they are based on all these different sources that I have reviewed. Okay, and that's just giving a basic intro to the literature review. These are kind of the areas that literature talk about with barriers to technology integration. So I'm just kind of giving an intro paragraph saying, this is what you find in the literature on barriers to effective technology integration. And this is an article, so it's likely to be shorter than the literature review that you will do. I can't tell about each article or each study that anyone ever did and explain every good thing about that study and every bad thing about that within the word limit that I have, which I think is about 5,000 words in this article. But I can just list out some of the basic findings that you can get from the literature review. And notice I don't say something like, I did a search of good literature about technology integration. No, I just say here's what I found. Possible barriers to effective technology integration come in several different categories. So then next I highlight an article. Ertmer et al. Suggests that first-order barriers to technology integration have been decreasing as teachers gain more and more access to technology tools and resources in schools. This has increased focus on the importance of other barriers such as time to plan and prepare for technology integration and beliefs about the usefulness and importance of technology for learning. And time to plan and prepare for technology integration continues to be one of the most frequently reported barriers in the literature. Again, this is what I've found by going through and reading the literature, and I also make sure to cite all my sources that I get this information from. Studies also indicate that access to technology tools and resources may continue to be significant barriers, especially in more rural districts and communities. And so again, I cite the sources for each statement that I make. If I make a big sweeping statement and there's no source cited, that's not good, because where did I get my information? If I was to say, time to plan and prepare for technology integration continues to be one of the most frequently reported barriers in the literature, and with no citation, then somebody might say, well, how do you know that? You're not an expert on this, so how do you know that that's one of the main things? So then I cited my sources, that way they know where I got the information from. And then what it does here is that this literature review overall gets more general. It's just talking about general barriers to technology integration. It gets more specific as we go along. So if we go further down, I talk about in rural U.S. barriers in rural education, because my study that I'm writing in this article is about rural barriers to technology integration between public, or I'm sorry, urban and rural school districts, which is important. So I talk about, then I go specifically to only those studies that talk about urban versus rural K-12 barriers to technology integration. Even though before I talked about more general area of just barriers overall in technology, or barriers to technology use. So that's kind of an example of a literature review. Hopefully that helps you to get an idea of what a review of literature is. It's hard work. There's no question about that. But it's the preliminary work that everyone must do. Is the gateway that everyone must pass through before you can do good research. If you want to do a research study, you've got to know what other studies people have done already. And that way you can tailor your study to either duplicate maybe something somebody else has done, or more often, what you might want to do is actually create a study that's slightly different, that covers something else or takes the research that other people have done that one step further and gathers more information for your audience than somebody else has already done. And how do you know that the research you're doing is relevant unless you have done the hard work of reviewing the literature? This is also a great tool to have for when you might want to review things for your own work, right? If you want to know best practices maybe in your job, let's say you're a counselor in clinical mental health, and there are certain types of patients or treatments that you have that you're not sure if they're effective or not. Well, the first thing to do is to find that literature and look into it, see what it says, and then that can help you to inform your practice to make sure you're doing the best kind of practice you can for your clients and patients. So that's a literature review. It's hard work, but it's very important. And your literature, your preliminary literature review will require you to have 7 to 10 sources, and you're going to have to combine these, weave these together into a nice review of the literature that goes from more general to specific about some kind of study that you might propose to do in this class. And if you do that, if you keep reading those articles and writing down what each article says, you'll be ready for this literature review when it comes. And so I think that's about all we have for this week. So I do wish you luck. Carry on with your work and have a great week.